Your existence brings a light into this world like no other. Please keep that light shining. We are going to begin today's celebration of life by singing a song together, and we have the lovely Elise Witt as our song leader today. And Elise, please let us know what song we will be starting with.
We will be starting with a song that is not in your book, because it's very simple. And I would like for us to just sing it a little bit and just find harmonies, go wild with it, just like use this as a warm-up for our voices. The words are, sing through my voice, play or pray through my hands, let the way be open. That's the whole thing. Sing through my voice, play or pray through my hands, let the way be open.
Please rise and bow to your spirit as you are willing and able.
And I will sing it. I'm just going to keep singing it, and once you all are singing it, I'm going to go wild, so I hope you will as well. It goes like this. Sing through my voice, play through my hands, let the way be open. Sing through my hands. Sing through my hands. Sing through my voice. Sing through my voice. Play through my hands. Let the waves be open. Right in your body. Sing through my voice. Play through my hands. Let the waves be open. Sing through my voice, play through my hands, let the way be open. Sing through my voice, pray through my hands, let the way be open. One time. Sing through my voice, pray through my hands, let the way be open.
Many hats.
That and I can never quite figure out how tall I am. Welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a spiritual community philosophically based on existentialist and feminist principles, dedicated to human liberation and the protection of the natural world. We make our spiritual home here in the Old Stone Church, which was hand-built by the members of the African American Antioch East Baptist Church. We acknowledge that racial hostility drove those African Americans from the area, and we honor them and the powerful history of this place. We also acknowledge that in the 1800s, the Muskogee Creek people were driven from this land, and we support justice for all indigenous people. My name is Patton White, and I will be facilitating this morning's celebration of life. And in lieu of opening words, I'm going to again invite people who are interested to participate in some opening movement. And again, this comes from the Qigong tradition, which is based on ancient Chinese medicine. So, if you are so inclined, you can rise and embody your spirit as you are willing and able. And we're going to start by just taking our hands and rubbing them together. You can do this with your eyes open or closed. And then release and let the arms come out to the side and up. And bringing some energy down into our lower dantian region just below our belly button. Coordinating our breath, inhaling and exhaling. And then here, stopping at about chest level, we're going to take one hand and place it on the shoulder and then just pat down the inside surface of the arm and then turn the arm over and come back up the outside. And repeating that. Tapping down and back up. And then over to our opposite side, down the inside of the arm and up the outside. And then just taking your hands and making a soft little fist and just knock here on the thymus. And then releasing everything down and just let the eyes close for a moment and scan for yourself. Where are you at this moment? And then you may return to your seat. If anyone has any community announcements that they would like to share, please write them down. I believe we have some paper and writing implements on the table there in the center of the rear of the sanctuary. And I will share those shortly after Marcia shares her words. Do we have anyone here who might be here for the first time or a second time or hasn't been around for a while? And would you like to let us know who you are and how you came to be here?
Sure. This is my second time here, so still new. My name is Glenna. So I enjoyed last week and I needed to come back for more. So
Welcome back, Jen. Let's hear it for Gresham Park. Anyone else? All right, well, just a reminder, if you haven't already and you'd like to fill out our little connection card, please do so and place it in the offering plate later. Anyone having a birthday or anniversary to celebrate?
we have a birthday song.
All right, so we have a birthday celebrant or two. Ted, what was that indication?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay, so let's have Linda and Ted come forward. And there might be one other person who might not be here when their birthday is held, and so they might want to come up too.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. All right, so Elise is going to share with us a birthday song.
You know that God, this the day you were born, the angels did the
the boat to Gabriel's home. God, dance the day you were born. So grateful for the gift of you. God, dance the day you were born. Angels in the bump to Gabriel's home. God, dance the day you were born. So grateful for the gift of you. I saw Sabu, the funky chicken, spending his ticket in the blue suede shoes. I saw Sabu, the boogaloo, two-faced with the gift of you. I heard some folks say that long ago I couldn't dance to. They were so people I'd see her take back. Jericho, thinking about the gift of you. God, dance one more time. God, dance the day you were born. The angels get the drum to Gabriel's home. God, dance the day you were born. So grateful for the gift of you.
So just so that we know, Linda, what's your birthday?
Today.
Today's Linda's birthday. Ted, what's your
August 11th, that's Friday.
birthday? August 11th. Love it. When is yours?
My birthday is August the 19th, and I will be 89 years old.
And on August 11th, my birthday, there's a party at Railroad Earth next to Emory Field. The band is playing. Emory Village.
Can we still sing it for like a happy birthday?
I think we just did, Jan. All right, we have another congregational song.
Okay.
Elise, what will this one be?
This one is also not in your book.
Okay.
She's being so radical today.
Okay. I was just wondering if you've ever stopped to think, what if every session of Congress started with singing?
Yeah.
What if every daily group started with singing? Babies are born singing. When did we stop? How did we stop? Why did we stop singing? Singing in our souls, singing in our bodies, singing in our souls and our hearts.
Please rise on your spirit for the living name.
Singing in our souls, our souls and our bodies. Singing in our souls, singing in our bodies, singing in our souls. One more time. Singing in our souls, singing in our bodies, singing in our souls. Imagine computer programmers all singing. Doctors, patients, anesthesiologists all singing. People from basketball, all singing. Students and teachers, janitors and principals all singing. Because singing in our soul, singing in our bodies.
Who's going to propose that amendment to start singing before each Congress? At this time, I'd like to welcome our fellowship minister, Reverend Marsha Michener, to come forward and share her remarks for today. It's on.
Okay. I wasn't sure when it was my time to come up here if I was going to be able to do it because I feel like I'm in this little plug. It's so hot that it's hard to even just navigate. When I said, I thought old people were supposed to get cold. You know, that's not happening. But I'm very glad to be here this morning. I'm glad to be here. I just have been thinking a whole lot this past week about existentialism. We're going to have we'll be doing some kind of workshop or just a series or something. And so I've been reading some more about that. And I guess I've just been thinking a little about authenticity and about what is it? You know, what is authenticity? How are we authentic in our lives? So I want you to think about that. What is it that you think makes you an authentic person? How you live your life in a way that makes you feel that it would be authentic to who you truly are. So those are that's some of the questions that we'll talk about when we get into our discussion of existentialism. I'm not know about the other things, but that's just the thing that's been in my mind so much this past week. So, great to have you here. I hope you'll have a wonderful week. Carpe diem today.
So I have a couple of community announcements to share, and if anyone else has something they'd like to bring up, please do so. Starting off with looking for an apartment for one in Candler Park. Who is this? Okay, so.
Yes, this is the anniversary of my wife's death from cancer, and we moved. My daughter moved up here from Baltimore, and years up. So I'm looking for an apartment for myself. Candler Park is a great neighborhood, so I'm here to make it. And any road you can push me down, that would be great.
So if anyone knows of an apartment or can spread the word, please share that information. Also, the total raised for the Atlanta Solidarity Bail Fund was $1,500. Thanks to everybody. Thank you for that correction to what was written here.
I do not remember if it was 07 or 70, so about 1,500.
I delivered the check. I delivered the check yesterday.
And we also will have a brown bag lunch next Sunday for those who are interested. And please consider joining in that. And that brings us now to our time of silence, where we spend approximately 5 minutes or so in one another's company, in quiet and community. There are also candles on either side of the sanctuary if you'd like to light one of those.
to the air. I know heaven is where we are. I know heaven is where we are.
Thank you, Elise, and thank you to everyone who gave of themselves to support our congregation. Reverend Kim Palmer is an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister serving as an affiliated community minister with the Unitarian Universalist Metro Atlanta North congregation. She is a board-certified chaplain and has served Emory University in the dual role of chaplain and spiritual health researcher until retiring last year along with her wife, Marty. She continues to train chaplains and support research projects at Emory and elsewhere as a contractor. When not working, she and her wife chip away at numerous house and yard projects while they dream of the time they can begin traveling. So, please join me in welcoming Reverend Kim Palmer for her talk, Hell and Paradise, Human Nature in a Disaster.
Checking to see how tall I am.
Yeah.
Thanks. 78 years ago today, the U.S. dropped the first of only 2 atomic bombs ever to be used on people. In a bid to end World War II and force Japan's surrender, the U.S. dropped a uranium bomb on Hiroshima, then 3 days later dropped an even more powerful plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. First-hand accounts are plentiful and horrific. 80,000 people were killed instantly in Hiroshima, rising to 140,000 by the end of the year from injuries and radiation exposure sustained during the blast. People within half-a-mile radius were vaporized. Those farther out received extensive burns, injuries from flying rubble or collapsing structures, or radiation poisoning, with symptoms like bleeding, vomiting, swelling of the tissues of the throat, and death. A conflagration fueled by the air rushing in toward the center of the blast killed many more in fire. Hiroshima was selected as the site for the demonstration of the new bomb's power, in part because it had not been destroyed by firebombing raids. These raids had been destroying city after city in campaigns that used traditional explosives to splinter wooden structures into kindling, followed by incendiary devices to burn the resulting mess. And they could kill up to 100,000 people over the course of a couple of nights. The atomic bomb achieved this level of fearsome destruction with a single device deployed by a single plane. It was an inhumane act in a long line of inhumane acts, not just through this war, but through all the wars in our history. I'd like to offer a moment of silence for those injured, killed, and traumatized in Hiroshima. And as we pause in remembrance of this awful day, let's also recognize the pain and suffering of those in Nagasaki, in the London Blitz, in the concentration camps of the Nazis, in the massacre in Rwanda, in the current conflict in Ukraine, and in mothers and children caught in razor wire along our own border. For all the victims of our inhumanity, let us hold space and bear witness. Please join me in silent reflection. Thank you. On a lighter note, I recently rediscovered my local library. It was a polling place for early voting in last year's midterm elections, and while spending 3.5 hours in a line that snaked around and through the stacks, I noticed that there were quite a few interesting books. My wife Marty, in fact, picked one up to read in the line. And then after we voted, she renewed her library card so she could take it home to finish. When she brought that one back, she picked another one. And I also found a couple of things to read. Deadly Outbreaks, How Medical Detectives Save Lives. And American Plague, The Untold Story of Yellow Fever. Both of which were very good. Currently, the books I have checked out are Terror in the Name of God, Why Religious Militants Kill, and A Paradise Built in Hell, The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster. It's this last book by Rebecca Solnit that's been rolling around in my mind, and especially in light of today's anniversary. Solnit describes her interest in people's response to disaster, sparked by her own experiences and stories of others about a kind of euphoria that takes hold in the aftermath of a disaster. Like an intense reconnection with strangers as people emerge from their houses to witness the destruction of a tornado, a flood, or a fire. She describes how the divisions between people fall away and how, with the lack or delay of government response, people self-organize to take care of each other. She says, in the wake of an earthquake, a bombing, or a major storm, most people are altruistic, urgently engaged in caring for themselves and those around them, strangers and neighbors, as well as friends and loved ones. The positive emotions that arise in those unpromising circumstances demonstrate that social ties and meaningful work are deeply desired, readily improvised, and intensely rewarding. This is what she refers to as paradise in hell. She describes, for example, the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, after which many people trudged to Golden Gate Park for safety amid fires and aftershocks, where one middle-class displaced woman started a soup kitchen. This ad hoc facility, feeding over 300 people within a few days of the disaster, was set up in a tent constructed of quilts and blankets that were donated by the crowd and stitched together, supplied with meat and other foods donated by shopkeepers or requisitioned from warehouses, cooked on stoves scavenged from the rubble in the damaged buildings. Her immediate response to the disaster was to find a way to serve those around her. 3,000 people died in the earthquake, and about half the city was left homeless. Residents stood watch on rooftops and put out wind-blown embers before they could start new fires. Neighbors dug out neighbors and treated their injuries. And numerous kitchens, community centers, and relief projects arose spontaneously as communities organized to meet the emergency needs of the moment. She describes a similar stepping up to meet the need after 9/11, when the World Trade Center buildings came down in a terrorist attack. People helped each other evacuate from the towers, carrying those who couldn't walk down 70, 80 flights of stairs. They helped each other flee ground zero and find shelter. They helped direct pedestrians and clear the roadway for emergency vehicles racing toward the scene. And they took strangers in when they didn't have any way to get home. The Coast Guard put out a call to help evacuate people from the waterfront, and ferries, fireboats, water taxis, cruise ships, and pleasure boats of every size and description came to make repeated trips across the Hudson River to New Jersey or Staten Island, taking over 300,000 people to safety. Volunteers came from all over the US and Canada to help, distributing goods that had been donated from all over the world. People served food from impromptu kitchens and canteens, while some scoured the city for materials requested by frontline responders, things like masks, boots, and cough drops. Everywhere, people wanted to do something to help. That same phenomenon occurred and was documented in Hiroshima. Witnesses describe how those who escaped critical injury served others less fortunate. By digging neighbors out of ruins, helping people make their way to open spaces at local parks, binding wounds, bringing water to the sick and injured, and moving people in immediate danger from rising tides or encroaching fires. They searched houses for supplies, located and set up tents for shelter, and took in orphaned children. Healthcare professionals, sometimes with their own critical injuries, treated people in bombed medical facilities and relief stations or open spaces. Doctors provided care to an unimaginable onslaught of patients who made their way to the remaining hospitals. In the book Hiroshima, John Hersey describes the efforts of Dr. Terafumi Sasaki, a young surgeon at a Red Cross hospital, and I noticed that this author was quoted in the Order of Service today. He says, Dr. Sasaki was blown to the floor, but is uninjured. He is only one of 6 doctors out of 30 at the Red Cross hospital still able to function. There are only 10 nurses out of a staff of 200 that are able to work. Dr. Sasaki grabs bandages from the storeroom and helps people. Starting with the closest patients, he eventually prioritizes those who are the worst. Literally 10,000 people are making their way to the hospital. Many are horribly burned, maimed, vomiting, and dying. He takes the worst wounds first, hoping to keep people from bleeding to death. After only a few hours, he works mechanically, going relentlessly from one patient to the next. Dr. Sasaki works 3 days straight with only 1 hour's sleep. Others have described a broader citizen-led effort to stabilize the shattered city. Rescue teams and volunteers came from all across Japan. Despite many local workers being killed or incapacitated, basic services were back up and running within days or weeks. Water pumps, communication lines, streetcars, lights. Largely through the effort of volunteers from Hiroshima and the surrounding towns. What these stories show us is the mutual care and compassion that arises after a disaster. Consistently, in the midst of the confusion and helplessness, is the impulse to help others, and it's a testament to the beauty of human nature, the way individual survivors respond to the overwhelming needs around them. But despite these good and selfless acts, there is a darker side to disaster response, and to human nature as well. Even while citizens are doing what it takes to meet the needs of the population, the authorities often are mounting a response based in fear and control. Solnit calls it elite panic, where those in the upper classes fear lawlessness and anarchy of the masses, and enlist the power of the military and police forces to contain and control the population hardest hit and most affected. Regressive policies are instituted to protect business and political interests, and the people affected by the disaster are seen as a threat rather than as victims deserving of aid. Often this is expressed as a fear of looting and implemented in shoot-to-kill orders. This can add a second layer of catastrophe to an already difficult disaster situation, as authorities protect property over lives and abuses become rampant from those given emergency powers. Solnit describes how this played out after the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. More than 17,000 Army troops, plus members from the Navy, the Marines, and the California National Guard were sent to the city to keep order. The mayor issued a proclamation stating that the federal troops, members of the regular police force, and all special police officers were authorized to kill any person found engaged in looting or in the commission of any other crime. However, as is typical of this anti-looting provision, it did not distinguish opportunistic theft from the emergency requisitioning of supplies needed to save lives. Many people who were acting in altruistic or helpful ways to meet the needs of the people were assumed to be looting and shot without warning, their bodies thrown into the fire or dumped in the bay. These included men bent over the rubble trying to dig others out, shopkeepers unlocking their own stores to distribute their goods to those in need, and volunteers carrying those goods back to the parks to serve the newly homeless assembled crowd. While documented looting by residents was rare, troops were reported searching people's homes and removing valuables, or carrying cases of liquor and cigar out of shops for their own use. Citizens were driven from their damaged homes and neighborhoods and often prevented at gunpoint from retrieving their own supplies or fighting local fires. The response of the authorities made things immeasurably worse. Solnit also describes the modern-day disaster movie genre, where the hero must try to prevent, and then when nobody listens to him, respond to plagues, floods, fires, volcanoes, meteor strikes, or climate disasters, and how Hollywood perpetuates this false view of the crisis-driven, irrational, dangerous, and violent mob, and the reversion of human nature into savagery and self-interest. Interestingly, when sociologist Enrico Quarantelli tried to write his thesis in 1954 on this panic response, he was unable to find evidence that supported it. On the contrary, he found that urgently terrifying situations did not result in ruthless competition and the breakdown of social order, but instead tended to be characterized by cooperation and mutual care. Quarantelli later became a leading disaster researcher, and over 15 years after his No Panic thesis, he lamented that, quote, most of the disaster funding, even to this day, is based on the notion of how can we prevent people from panicking or engaging in antisocial behavior. The panicked mob, violent and lawless and looting, is a stereotype that persists. We saw it in action in another relatively recent disaster when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Of course, there was a great outpouring of self-help and neighbor help as volunteers came from all around the Gulf in fishing boats, skiffs, powerboats, and canoes, the so-called Cajun Navy, to rescue people off the rooftops in the flooded lower part of the city. There were also a great number of volunteers that came to the area after the waters receded to help clear away debris and rebuild. Many others took in those who were able to flee with nothing but the clothes on their back and helped them get back on their feet with clothes, furniture, apartments, and jobs. But the ugly side, oh Lord, the ugly side. As some waited on their rooftops for days, they could see helicopters flying over with guns pointing out the sides. One family was eventually rescued by a boat, and then at the staging area were faced with armed police who sent them off to a highway to wait for rescue buses. They waited for 5 days on an overpass, and while some buses came, there were only a few. Later, more police came by with M16s and AK-47s and turned the crowd back to the city, telling them no one was coming and to try to walk to the Superdome sports arena downtown. The mother of the family, frail and wheelchair-bound, was finally evacuated, and a few days later, the rest of the family was bused to Texas, where the 24-year-old son said, "We ended up in this concentration-like camp with barbed wire fences and snipers, like we did something wrong." Those that made it to the Superdome fared no better. The facility was crammed to capacity with no power, no water, and no working sanitation system. Rumors spread about violent gangs, rapes, and killings, hundreds of corpses rotting in the Superdome. And these stories were amplified by newscasters who took the reports at their word. Of note, when the Superdome was finally evacuated, exactly 6 corpses were found. 6. 4 from natural deaths and a suicide were included. Other stories of horror proliferated in the media about hoodlums and thugs taking advantage of an unguarded city, robbing, looting, and shooting people. Emergency responders were called off search and rescue to focus on looting, and an additional 40,000 troops were requested. Solnit tells us that no evidence was ever found that anyone was shot or killed by these supposed gangs. Reports of police officers being shot and of snipers shooting at rescue helicopters were later retracted. Nevertheless, every instance of materials being taken from the store ramped up the rhetoric of wide-scale looting. While some theft was present and unavoidable, the cops were also engaged in looting stores for computers, jewelry, and guns. Cops were caught on camera raiding a Walmart and stripped a Cadillac dealership of its cars, which later jokingly advertised that their cars were driven by New Orleans' finest. And like in other disasters, there was no distinction made of opportunistic theft and the requisition of food, bedding, and other essentials for survival and aid. Actions that were necessary in the city where stores were not open, and in many places money had become irrelevant. Solnit holds up Katrina as possibly the worst case of elite panic in U.S. history, with much of that fed by racism. People trying to escape the city over bridges were turned back at gunpoint, and the fear of an invading horde led to the deputization of white men who shot anyone black who was moving through their neighborhoods, even those trying to check on relatives or evacuate. Citizens were turned into vigilantes, and many later boasted about how many black men they had shot. These murders were common knowledge, yet nobody was ever held to account. We are now in a time where this type of fear of social disorder, fear of poor people, minorities, and immigrants is widespread, and the irrational overreaction it spawns is simmering just below the surface. These fears are stoked by messages constantly pounded by the right-wing media for political ends, and there's a noticeable attitude of being ready to resort to violence against any threat, any perceived threat or offense, whether perceived or real. Evidence of this fear and belligerence is all around us. There's the current controversy over country music singer Jason Aldean's song, "Try That in a Small Town," that glorifies vigilante justice and relies heavily on racist tropes and images. Recent news stories have described black cable company workers or delivery drivers being chased out of neighborhoods at gunpoint. Teenagers have been shot for accidentally turning around in the wrong driveway or knocking on the wrong door. Stand your ground laws have enabled people spoiling for a fight to be looking for opportunities to shoot those they disapprove of, for encroaching on spaces, public or private, that they feel are theirs by right. Clearly, human nature allows for awfulness as well as nobility. So where do we fit in all this? One thing that is pretty much guaranteed is that another disaster is on the way. There will be another pandemic, or a hurricane, or a flood, or a fire, or maybe another snowpocalypse. Climate change itself is a slow-moving disaster with increasingly common disruptions, some of which we are likely to see firsthand. What shall we do when disaster hits? Let's remember who we are, people of kindness, rationality, and peace. It's in our nature to step up in an emergency, to do what is needed to survive, and to provide aid to those around us, both loved ones and strangers. Communities naturally pull together for mutual care, and volunteers self-organize to meet the needs of the moment. When we hear rumors of looting or murder or mayhem, let's remember that the victims of a disaster are rarely a threat, and that our cultural tropes around humans as savage and unrestrained do not reflect common reality. Let's view media reports with skepticism when evidence is scant and reports are based on rumors. Let's not assume there is widespread looting and the breakdown of social order when we see one scene of a few dozen people breaking storefront windows played on a repeating loop on every news station, as if that's the only narrative. Let's challenge the authorities when they prioritize property over people, when they shoot first and ask questions later, if at all. Let's not be the person who starts shooting when a stranger moves through the neighborhood or a young person accidentally hops in our car. We can't control much in an emergency, but we can control our own fears, our own hearts. We can step up to help. We can get down to the business of saving and caring, rescuing and rebuilding. We can deliver hope and love where it's absent. We can pour ourselves into making a situation better rather than worse. And frankly, we can do it any time. We don't even need to wait for a disaster.
Thank you, Kim. I have one additional community announcement that came a tad late, and that is C.J. Jones and Spirit Bones on August 11th. We'll be doing a birthday jam at Railroad Earth. Please see Ted for more information on that. We will finish up today with a congregational song and then a closing movement. So, Elise, what will we be singing finally?
Before I do the last song, I just wanted to say where the songs came from that we've done. The birthday song is by Andrew Lawrence, and it has spread quite a bit. There's a wonderful video of that as well, about the day you were born, which I'll be happy to share. And the first song, Sing Through My Voice, is written by Abby Spinner, who's part of a group of women called the Glorious Chorus. And this last one is by someone who I first heard about when I was in college, Terry Garthwaite from the band Joy of Cooking. I fell in love with that band, and then had the fortune to meet Terry years later, and now sing with her. And this is a call and response, so whatever I sing, you just sing it back to me. It's not necessary.
Please rise and bow to your spirit as your will and nail.
Feel the heat, feel the heat, ball of fire, ball of fire. Heaven is down, heaven is down. Rock the fire, rock the fire. I can see the light, I can see the light. Brand new day, brand new day. Bolt of light, bolt of light. It takes my breath away. Shine on, shine on, shine on, shine on, shine on, shine on.
it's similar to how we started off in that we're going to be taking one hand and instead of tapping, we're just going to let it float down about an inch or two off of the inside surface of the arm, and then we shift to the other side and brush down. And again, also coordinating our inhale and exhale. And then bringing the hands together one more time and rubbing them together, squeezing all surfaces, front and back. And then just a little shake. And have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend and the coming week. Thank you.